Christianity invented the just war tradition, according to which the slaughter of women and children is out of bounds. Prior to Christianity, no one thought this. Everybody did it, and everybody today does it everywhere in the world, and we do it too. The bombing of Dresden, the bombing of Hamburg, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the incineration of women and children is the normal course of war. I just watched a World War II documentary in which they interview an old bomber, a U.S. bomber pilot, and he goes, I was given a bombing mission to hit a target. I asked the U.S. authorities, who's in the building? They said 20,000 women and children. And this guy kind of breaks down. You can watch this on Netflix. And he goes, I'm like, what the hell? You want me to kill 20,000 women and children? He goes, we're supposed to be the good guys. And he goes, but I couldn't repudiate the order. It was an order, so I did it. So what I'm getting at is
that everybody does it.
It is not ethical. It is not, but I'm simply saying, Alex, that you are a product of the Christian morality that repudiates it now. You're standing on a Christian mountain and acting like, whoa, look at these Christians. They taught you to talk like this.
Dinesh, these people did not teach me to think like that.
They did.
These people were listening to their God who was telling them to slaughter innocent women and
right.
children.
The ancient Israelites were. But the ancient Israelites are not what taught you. What taught you is the 1,000-year tradition of the early Christian church.
Which came a bit too late for the Amalekites.
It came a bit too late for the Amalekites, to be sure.
Were the Israelite armies not instructed by the God that you believe in?
They were instructed by God.
And they were instructed to do things which you would now consider to be immoral, yes?
Absolutely.
So God has commanded them to do something which you now consider to be immoral, whether or not you consider it to be immoral because of the later developments of Christian ethics. God himself has told us that we must abandon our intuition that the slaughter of women and children, and by the way, when it's unnecessary in those instances to slaughter them, is wrong.
I don't view it that way. This is how I view it. Let's put it this way. Even in the ancient world, divine revelation comes into a primitive, barbaric world which is full of a lot of really bad guys.
And God says, keep going.
No,
keep it up.
God does not say keep going. But what God does is and again, this is called, trying to get the point of what is happening. There's slavery in this world, in the ancient world, and it is true. The Bible doesn't come in and go, we denounce slavery, we denounce the killing of women and children. It doesn't do that.
The opposite.
It actually immerses itself into an existing, admittedly barbaric culture. And what's actually going on there with the Amalekites, the Canaanites, and so on, if you just read the Old Testament, it tells you. It has to do with the displacement of polytheism with monotheism.
That's fine.
Hold on.
That justifies the murder of children and women.
I didn't say it does.
That's what you're implying.
I'm saying that the way it happens historically is God takes a side. The single monotheistic God, who, by the way, in the Old Testament does not act like a monotheistic God. He acts like a tribal God. Right? He acts like the God of only the Israelites.
And so Israel's enemies... Listen to what you just said. The God that you believe in is acting like a tribal war god.
The God of the God that is depicted in the Old Testament is, he goes, I'm picking the Jews. Yes. I'm choosing you.
To the extent that
your enemies become my enemies,
to the extent that your male and female slaves may come from the nations around you. From them you may buy and sell slaves. You may also purchase some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clan born in your town. You can bequeath them to your children as inheritable property. This is human beings, by the way. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. So not only do we have, the description of slavery in the Old Testament, we have an explicit condoning instructions on how to do it and doing it based on race.
Well, I wouldn't say based on race because
how else do you interpret?
First of all, racism is an invention of the modern world.
Call it tribe if you like.
Ethnicity. These are clans.
These
are militaristic
Israelite
clans.
slaves this way, and you treat non-Israelite slaves this way. By the way that the Israelite slaves are treated, we're told in Exodus 21, if you have a male slave, they're to go free after 7 years. But if you give them a wife and they have children while they're your property, then they don't go free after 7 years, only the man does. And Exodus 21 says, but if the man decides that he loves his wife and his children and his master and wants to stay, then he can say to his master he wants to stay, at which point he's taken outside, his ear is pierced like cattle, and he becomes a slave for life. Now, by the way, female slaves aren't let go after 7 years at all in the first place. Now, I understand what you're saying when you say, when you say, like, okay, maybe God couldn't have abolished slavery for some reason, but at least, for example, when the male slave goes free, let his wife and children go with him.
Yeah.
Why not this simple moral improvement? There is no conceivable reason that this could not have been ordained by God, but
look,
it was not.
You have a capital argument here to be had with the rabbis, and look, there is a massive rabbinical tradition that discusses
Dinesh,
every
you're
fine
here
point,
to
as you
convince
know.
these people that the Bible is true.
But it's not my job to
I'm not a rabbi
isolate the Old Testament from the New and justify ancient battles that have no bearing. Let me put it this way:
and tell me how specifically
if
the New
someone were to
Testament
listen to you,
undoes this.
they would have no idea that the first anti-slavery movement in the world is driven by the Quakers and the evangelical Christians. They read the same Bible, but evidently they don't read it your way, because if they read it your way, they would be the prime apologists and defenders of slavery. So
Dinesh.
you have to explain why you take a universal institution.
Dinesh, when did that happen?
In every culture.
When did that happen?
When did what happen?
When did that movement first get off the ground?
It's in America, it starts shortly after the Quakers get here. So the early let's put it this way, the early anti-slavery movements are about 1710,
So
1720.
Here's two hypotheses then. One hypothesis is that God actually didn't like slavery the whole time. It just took human beings literally thousands of years to work it out, and that just so happened to coincide with the Enlightenment. That's one hypothesis. Another hypothesis is actually that the Bible does condone slavery, and that what's going on is, I think, for example, when you look at the actual verses that are being given as justification for the Christian abolitionist movement, what kind of verses are we talking about?
Well, what I'm saying is that first of all, the
Enlightenment... It may have been Christians who did it, but they were, to say that they were doing it as motivated by Christianity is a different kind of claim.
It is a very significant claim because to you, the Bible exists in an interpretive tradition that has been expostulated over many centuries by Christians. They're reading that Bible. They're reading it with great care as to what it's trying to say. And the Enlightenment, far from being the origin of any of this, in fact, the racism that came out of the Enlightenment was of a species that never existed before. I mean, you think of the great philosophers like Hegel, Kant, their denunciations of blacks, for example, you'll find nothing like that in the Old Testament, leave alone the New.
And if modern Enlightenment thinkers were beholden to think that these Enlightenment thinkers were ineffable, creators of an inviolable ethic, then we'd probably have had a harder time getting rid of it, don't you think?
Well, nobody. Do you
think the abolitionist movement was helped or hindered by the existence of the verses that I've just described?
Well, I mean, I think it was hindered by them because I think that the Southern apologists of slavery appealed to those verses. To be sure, they appealed to the Old Testament verses that were pro-slavery.
Tell me where you could appeal to be anti-slavery specifically. I mean, not love your enemy, love your neighbor. Tell me specifically. Like, here's how I can put it: you're in a time machine. You go back to antebellum slavery in the American South.
Yeah.
And you find yourself on a plantation, and you say to the master of the house, you own a bunch of slaves. I don't think this is moral. I don't think you should be mistreating them. Where do they turn? And plausibly so, to justify what they're doing.
Well, the answer
they pull out
is
their
this.
Bible, and you can say to them, well, hold on, have you read this verse? Tell me the verse. Tell me where I can point this person in order to dispel them of their
So I
ideas
would
about
recommend to you a compendium of sermons that were delivered by Northern preachers in the decades leading up to the Civil War. Hold on.
I want to know what the verses
right,
are.
so
I'm
going to give you their mode of preaching because the key to it is to understand how they use the Bible. It's not the way you do it.